There is a quiet, hidden lake a short walk from my house in East Texas. I've been going there to fish for a long time. It is tucked away from the roads and houses, which gives it perfect privacy. Usually, I am the only person out there on the water. Because the walk is a bit long, I leave my canoe in the same spot by the lake whenever I am not using it. It is much easier than carrying the heavy thing back and forth from the house. I keep it leaning against a large oak tree and keep it covered so that snakes or other animals do not hide inside. One warm summer evening, I was out on the water with my younger brother, MJ. He is only in the 4th grade, and since our parents were out for the evening, I was responsible for watching him. We had been out for about an hour and had caught a few catfish. As the sun began to set and the light disappeared behind the pine trees, I heard a loud splashing sound from the edge of the lake. I turned the boat and saw a man standing at the water's edge. He was tipping a large barrel over and pouring a dark liquid into the lake. It looked like he was polluting the water. I felt I had to do something, so I shouted out to ask him what he was doing. The man looked up at me in surprise and immediately ran into the woods, even though the barrel was still pouring. I looked closer at the liquid and noticed it was a very dark red color. Even though it was getting dark, the sight made me feel very uneasy. I decided we needed to leave right away. I care a lot about nature, and seeing someone dump waste like that made me sick, but I no longer felt safe at the lake. I planned on reporting the man to the authorities. I paddled back to our usual spot and unloaded our gear. As I was covering the canoe, I heard the distinct sound of a branch snapping nearby. I wanted to call out, but I decided it was better to stay quiet. I finished my work faster than ever before. I did not even bother to lean the canoe against the tree. I just left it on the grass. I grabbed our cooler and gear and MJ and I walked quickly. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time because I felt like someone was following us through the trees. Once we got home, I locked the door immediately. I was truly spooked. I put the fish in the fridge and started heating up some food for my brother. While the microwave was running, there was a sudden knock at the front door. The fear I felt in the woods came back instantly. I was certain I had been followed. My lights were on and my car was in the driveway, so whoever was outside knew we were home. A moment later, the person moved and knocked on the window. A man's voice came through the glass, telling me that he had seen me at the lake and wanted to explain himself. I had no intention of opening the door. The fact that he had tracked me to my house made him seem very dangerous. When he became more aggressive and kept yelling for me to answer, I finally shouted through the wall. I told him to leave immediately or I would call the police. The man tried to remain calm and asked me again to just open the front door so he could talk. I repeated my threat to call the cops, and then the house went silent. I went around and locked every single window. I called the police to report the dumping at the lake and the man at my door. Making those reports helped me feel a little better, but I remained very alert. Around 2 a.m., a loud crash from the den woke me up. I realized someone had broken in. I grabbed a heavy baseball bat and told MJ to stay hidden. I heard quiet footsteps coming up the stairs. I stood by the bedroom door with the bat ready. I watched the doorknob slowly turn and the door push open. The silhouette of a man entered the room. I quickly turned on the lamp and yelled for him to get out. I showed him I was armed and ready to defend us. The man had a small blade in his hand, but when he saw I wasn't backing down, he told me he was leaving. He turned and ran back downstairs. I chased him as far as the landing and watched him flee through the front door. I checked on MJ and then called the emergency line. My living room window was completely shattered with glass all over the carpet. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, holding my bat and watching that broken window. At 7 a.m., my parents finally returned home. I explained everything that had happened while they were away. My father went straight to work. He measured the frame and fixed the window. I later went back to the lake with the police to show them where the man had been. However, the barrel was gone. The man must have come back to move it before morning. I believe that barrel held something much worse than chemicals. I think it was something he was willing to kill for. I am just glad I kept the door locked and my brother safe. A week later, I still felt uneasy, so I went back to the oak tree to get my canoe. The grass underneath it was flat and dying. When I flipped the boat over, I froze in fear. Someone had carved a message into the wood with a knife. "I know where you sleep." Next to the words was a rusty fishing lure I had never seen before. That's when it hit me. He hadn't just followed me once. He was still out there watching and waiting for me to be alone in the woods again. The fluorescent lights of the office had been buzzing in my ears for 12 hours. My boss had been clear. The deadline was tomorrow, and being the new guy at 22, I wasn't about to be the one who failed. By the time I sprinted for the last bus, my off-green button-down was damp with sweat, and my tie was hanging loosely around my neck. I managed to collapse into a seat just as the doors hissed shut. The ride was a 75-minute blur of city lights and exhaustion. When the bus finally spat me out at my stop, I still had a 10-minute walk ahead of me. It was 9:20 p.m. in this neighborhood that wasn't late, but the streets were unnervingly empty. The silence felt heavy. The streetlights here are a joke. They're spaced so far apart that the sidewalk is a sequence of bright circles followed by long stretches of ink-black shadows. I hiked my laptop bag higher on my shoulder and quickened my pace. I was approaching the old abandoned hospital. I usually didn't mind it. I'd started hitting the gym recently and felt capable, even confident. Then I heard it. A sharp metallic strike against stone. I slowed down. Sitting on a large rock near the hospital's perimeter was a man. He looked like a ghost skeletal, skin stretched so tight over his ribs you could count them through his tattered open shirt. He hit the stone again. This time I saw the glint. It was a 9-inch blade, shimmering under the distant yellow glow of a street lamp. He muttered something, a guttural, unintelligible scream. Then, he began to tap the flat of the blade against his palm. The sound was a wet thud that echoed off the hospital walls. I tried to stay calm, but his head tilted to the side as he watched me. He looked like he was hunting. I gripped my bag tighter, wondering if I could use it to protect myself. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. I kept my eyes forward and kept walking. I tried to look strong, even though I was terrified. Every step felt heavy. I was almost past him and back into the dark part of the street when I heard his feet move on the gravel. He didn't move slowly. He jumped toward me. Suddenly, the distance between us evaporated. He was fast. Before I could breathe, he was standing right in front of me. He smelled like old sweat and copper. It was a thick, gross smell that made me want to gag. He stepped into my path, his eyes wide and glazed with a drug-induced film. His pupils were huge and gray. He reached out and grabbed my hand, holding me in place. His grip was very strong. His skin felt cold and dry, like old leather. But he didn't point the blade at me. Instead, he turned the knife toward his own chest. He leaned in until his face was only inches from mine. I could see the cracks on his lips and his yellow teeth. He didn't blink once. He looked very calm as he pushed the sharp edge of the knife into his own skin. He began to cut himself slowly. The blade went through his skin easily, like it was cutting through paper. I heard a quiet, wet sound as the skin opened up. I stood frozen and watched the blood start to cover his chest. The first few drops were dark, but then they turned bright red. He didn't seem to feel any pain. He didn't even make a sound. Actually, he looked more relaxed as he did it. He used the tip of the knife to draw a bloody line across his collarbone. The sight was traumatizing. I wanted to run or scream, but I couldn't move. A drop of his blood landed on my shirt sleeve. It felt warm on my arm. As the blood became more visible, his smile only grew wider, stretching across his face in a way that didn't feel human. His smile was so wide it looked like his skin might rip. He leaned his forehead against mine and forced me to look down at his bloody chest. He wasn't trying to rob me. He was showing me something horrific. "Do you see?" he whispered. His voice was rough and dry, Do you see how easy it is? He started to laugh. It was a low, bubbling sound. Blood was everywhere now. It soaked into his pants and dripped onto the ground between us. He started to sway back and forth, pulling me with him because he still had hold of my hand. He kept moving the knife, making small, quick cuts over his ribs. He finally released my hand, and the sheer shock of what I had just witnessed made my knees buckle. I fell onto the street in total terror. The ground was cold and dirty under my hands. He didn't move toward me. He simply started that same rhythmic tapping again, hitting the now blood-stained knife against his hand while staring into my soul. The sound of the metal hitting his bloody palm was the only thing I could hear. He looked happy, like he had just shown me something important. I looked at the knife, and then at his face. I realized the knife wasn't meant for me. It was for him. He just wanted me to watch his nightmare. He kept staring at me, and I saw spit dripping from the corner of his mouth. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I threw my wallet toward him, though I don't think he even wanted it. It landed near his feet, but he didn't look at it. I scrambled to my feet, tripping over my feet once before I got steady. I ran. I didn't stop until I was through my front door, fumbling with the deadbolt. I leaned against the door and tried to breathe. My lungs felt like they were on fire. I looked down and saw the red blood stain on my sleeve. I took the shirt off immediately and threw it in the trash. I didn't want it near me. I never made a complaint to the police. I know who those people are, and they know me. Making a scene would only make it worse. In this part of town, the police can't really help with people like him. I'm already looking for a new place to rent. But for now, I make sure my work is done long before the deadline hits. I don't walk those streets in the dark anymore. Now, every time I hear metal hitting something like a spoon on a plate, I feel his cold hand on my wrist again. I can still see his dark eyes watching me from the shadows.
The separation of my parents occurred before I was born, which meant my childhood was split between two different homes. Every summer until I reached 19, I traveled to rural Missouri to stay with my father. He had been raised in that same countryside, and the majority of his relatives still lived in the small community. Since there were no movie theaters or typical city entertainment, I spent most of those long, humid days following my older cousin around. We were constantly looking for ways to get into mischief or exploring the dense woods that surrounded my father's property. During one of our usual treks through the wilderness, we stumbled upon a massive lake hidden deep in the middle of nowhere. It sat there quietly, undisturbed by the outside world. The water was remarkably clear, and as we looked closer, we could see an incredible number of huge fish swimming just beneath the surface. When we returned home and asked the adults about the spot, none of them seemed to know it existed. We figured that was why the fish had grown to such monstrous sizes. No one in the area was fishing there. Anyone who had found it in the past must have kept the location a secret or simply forgotten it. We returned to that hidden pond 3 or 4 times after that, and every single trip resulted in a stringer heavy with large fish. On our 5th visit, we had a specific goal in mind. The summer was drawing to a close, and we wanted to gather enough fish for a large family fry to celebrate the end of the season. We set out on a warm Saturday morning, leaving about an hour before the sun came up. The hike into the woods took over an hour, and we knew the fish would stop biting once the afternoon heat set in. Our plan was to finish early and make it back to my father's house by the start of the afternoon. The sight of the pond at dawn was beautiful. As soon as we cast our lines, the fish started biting almost immediately. For the next few hours, it was constant action, with one fish after another being pulled from the clear water. By late morning, around 10:45, we had reached our limit. I was anxious to start the long walk back. We were carrying 2 5-gallon buckets filled to the brim with our catch, and I knew the 90-minute trek would be even slower with the extra weight. However, my cousin had other ideas. He decided he wanted to take a swim in the lake before we left. He tried to convince me to jump in with him, but I didn't know how to swim at the time. Despite my desire to leave, he was older and in charge, so I had no choice but to wait. I sat down on a large rock and watched as he prepared for his swim. There was an old, weathered rope tied to a tree limb hanging over the water, looking as though it had been there for a century. My cousin decided he wanted to use it as a swing. I told him it looked dangerous and expressed my concerns, but he just laughed at me. He stripped down to his boxers, left his clothes in a pile next to me, and climbed up into the tree. After grabbing the rope, he pushed off and swung out over the lake. The rope snapped right above him before he reached the peak of his swing. He hit the deep water with a heavy, dull thud. At first, I prepared myself to laugh and tease him about the rope breaking, but as the seconds ticked by, he did not come back to the surface. The silence became terrifying. I scanned the water, hoping to see him pop up further away or perhaps floating if the impact had knocked him out. But there was nothing. Panic began to set in. I waded into the water as far as I felt safe, desperately searching the depths. However, every step I took stirred up the silt, making the water cloudy and impossible to see through. It eventually became clear that he had drowned. I felt completely helpless, wondering if I could have saved him if only I knew how to swim. With nothing else I could do, I packed up our gear and began the walk home alone. The walk back was agonizing. A tiny part of me hoped that this was all a cruel joke, and that he would jump out from behind a tree to surprise me. That moment never came. The weight of the news I had to deliver grew heavier with every step. When I finally reached my family, I tried to explain what happened, but the words kept getting stuck in my throat. Finally, I managed to tell them that Mark had drowned. Once I regained some composure, I led my father and uncle back through the woods to the pond. We searched the area, but there was still no sign of his body. We eventually had to go to the sheriff's office to report the incident officially. As we approached the station, I began to freak out. In my young mind, I was certain I would be blamed for the accident. The adults eventually calmed me down and assured me I wasn't in trouble, but the guilt remained. Every time I looked at my uncle, I felt responsible. Even though he told me he didn't blame me, I found it hard to believe he didn't hold some small resentment toward me for being the one who came home. I gave my statement to the sheriff. A formal search was scheduled for the following morning. As it turned out, that was the same day I was scheduled to return to my mother's house. On Monday night, my mother sat me down to give me an update. She told me that a team of divers had successfully recovered Mark's body earlier that day. They explained that one of his feet had become tangled in a sunken log, which was why he had been unable to resurface. Hearing the details didn't make the pain go away, but the tragedy changed the course of my life. The experience served as a powerful motivation for me to finally learn how to swim. The guilt of being unable to help stayed with me for decades, and I vowed never to be in a position where I was unable to assist someone in danger again. In a strange and painful way, his passing had a lasting impact on who I became, though I would still give anything to have him back with us today.
My name is Ayla. I am 33 years old now, but from the age of 19 until I turned 23, my life was defined by an addiction to heroin. The story of how I first started using is a long one, but there is a different story that carries more weight for me. It is the story of how I finally got clean. Calling it a better story is a stretch, because the reality of it is horrifying. However, it provided the brutal wake-up call I needed to save my own life. So I suppose there is a silver lining buried somewhere in the tragedy. About 18 months into my addiction, the thin stability I had left completely vanished. I was kicked out of my apartment, and my family, understandably exhausted by my choices, cut ties with me. I found myself living on the streets. At 21 years old, standing only 5 feet 2 inches tall, and weighing barely over 100 pounds, I was incredibly vulnerable. Looking back, I realize I should have been terrified, but at the time, my mind was entirely consumed by the constant need to find my next fix. Even so, the reality of being a young woman without a home is a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. The first lesson you learn in that environment is the necessity of protection. It is a hard truth to admit, but survival often depends on having someone by your side. I was more fortunate than most. While many women are forced into dangerous situations for safety, I connected with a man who was also an addict and had been using for about as long as I had. He was only a few years older than me, and our bond wasn't just about the logistics of scoring drugs. We truly liked one another. Over time, that connection grew into a deep, genuine love. We spent 2 years navigating the world together. We faced the constant cycle of trying to quit, failing, and enduring the daily hardships of the lifestyle. The most important part of that time was the word together. He was my entire world, and I was his. He would do anything to keep me safe, from stealing to protect our interests, to physically defending me when things turned ugly. When we were eventually arrested for shoplifting and sentenced to 3 months in county jail, the separation was agonizing. I missed him more than I had ever missed my own family. I struggled to get by while he was locked away, so when the day of his release finally arrived, I was overwhelmed with relief. I actually cried with joy when I saw him again. While he was in jail, the system had forced him to get clean, but the moment he hit the pavement, his first instinct was to get high. I had anticipated this and prepared a small homecoming gift, a $10 bag of heroin. We quickly scouted out a quiet, secluded spot where we wouldn't be disturbed, eager to finally relax and be in each other's company again. He took his hit first, and then I used the rest of the supply. Afterward, we settled into each other's arms to sleep. It was a moment of closeness I had craved for months, a feeling of safety that is hard to put into words. As I drifted off, I felt him start to pull away slightly. I assumed he just needed to get up for a moment to use the bathroom. In my drug-induced haze and my desperation to keep him close, I reached out and tugged on his sleeve. I didn't want him to leave the embrace. I felt like I had waited an eternity for that cuddle, and I told myself he could surely wait just 1 more minute. When I finally opened my eyes again, I could still feel his arm draped around me. Coming down from a high makes the world feel sluggish and confusing, like your brain is struggling to log back into reality. For a brief second, I felt a wave of warmth and comfort. I wiggled closer to him, pulling his arm tighter against my body. I reached down to find his hand, intending to lace my fingers through his the way he always liked. That was when the warmth vanished. His hand wasn't just cold from the autumn Chicago air. It was a deep, heavy, stone-cold chill that bypassed the skin and went straight to my bones. It was the kind of cold that immediately signals that something is fundamentally wrong. I scrambled out from under him and spun around, frantically trying to shake him awake. When he didn't move, I let out a scream so violent that I physically became ill. The noise drew someone nearby to check on us, and the rest of the afternoon became a blurred montage of sirens, EMTs, and police officers asking endless questions. It was an overdose. After being clean for months in jail, his tolerance had dropped significantly. His body simply couldn't handle the dose. The realization that haunted me most was the memory of him pulling away. He hadn't been trying to go to the bathroom. He had been struggling to get help as his body began to shut down. While he was slipping into unconsciousness and passing away, I had been holding him tight, forcing him to stay still so I could enjoy the moment. I had slept next to his body for 5 or 6 hours. That image is something I carry with me every single day. Now, whenever I think about my recovery and how grateful I am to be sober, that memory is the very first thing that comes to mind. It serves as a permanent anchor to my past. I still find it impossible to say or type his name. Doing so triggers a level of grief that feels like it might tear me apart. Even though we were living a life of addiction, my love for him was the most real thing I had. I am plagued by the feeling that I am responsible for his death. He was clean when he walked out of those jail doors, and I was the one who handed him the very thing that killed him. It is a weight I carry constantly, a guilt that I suspect I will never truly be able to leave behind.
Growing up, the highlight of my life was the time spent fishing with my 2 older brothers. We lived in a remote rural area where the woods felt endless, and we would often spend our days hiking. Through the thick brush, we found various hidden creeks. Our success in terms of actual fish was usually minimal. The creeks rarely yielded anything of significant size. However, the catch was never the true point of the excursion. The real value lay in the silent camaraderie of sitting by the water with my brothers, passing the hours in the stillness of the trees. We followed the classic tradition of waking up long before the sun had risen. Our treks would begin in the cool, gray pre-dawn as we watched the light slowly steal across the sky and filter through the canopy. By the time we reached our chosen destination, the world would be fully bright. The morning dew would be clinging to our boots. It was a peaceful routine that defined our summers. The most frightening experience we ever had occurred on a day when we decided to be more adventurous than usual. We set out that morning with a collective determination to push further into the hills than we had ever gone before. We bypassed our familiar, reliable spots and kept walking until the woods grew denser and the air felt heavier. Eventually, we stumbled upon a location that seemed perfect. The surrounding forest was thick and ancient, but the creek itself was unexpectedly wide and deep. A large fallen tree stretched across the water like a natural bridge, adding to the beauty. After testing the trunk to ensure it was sturdy enough to hold our weight, the three of us carefully balanced our way across to the far bank. We spread out our gear and began to fish, hopeful for better luck. As the afternoon wore on, however, the fish remained elusive. The heat of the day began to set in, and the repetitive casting of lines grew tedious. Given how deep and inviting the water looked, we broke our usual rules. We set our fishing poles aside on the bank and jumped into the creek to go swimming. We had been splashing around for quite a while when I noticed a sudden shift in the atmosphere. My middle brother had stopped moving entirely and was staring intently into the dark tree line. When our oldest brother asked what was bothering him, he simply gestured toward the shadows of the woods. He whispered that someone was out there watching us from the cover of the trees. My initial thought was that we had encountered some local creep, but as I followed his pointing finger, that suspicion turned into sharp fear. Standing among the trees was an imposing, large man. Despite the shade, we could make out his appearance quite clearly. He was dressed in jeans and a heavy flannel shirt, which seemed strangely out of place given the warmth. A baseball cap was pulled low over his brow, obscuring much of his face. The most terrifying detail, however, was the long firearm, either a rifle or a shotgun, that he held firmly in his hands. A heavy silence fell over us as we tried to decide what to do. We were well aware that by wandering this far, we were almost certainly trespassing. We never knew exactly where the property lines were. We knew this land didn't belong to us. Up until that moment, we had never faced any consequences for our wandering. My middle brother and I looked to our oldest brother for a plan, but he looked shaken. He offered no immediate direction, choosing instead to keep his eyes locked on the armed man. Eventually, our oldest brother suggested that we should try to navigate back to the bank, grab our gear and retreat. The problem was that our clothes and poles were on the same side of the creek where the man was standing. We began to move slowly through the water toward the shore, trying to remain calm, before we could reach the bank. However, an elderly woman suddenly burst from the undergrowth. She was shrieking with a high, piercing intensity that sounded like a banshee. The sudden noise startled me so badly that I slipped. I fell backward into the deep water, struggling until my middle brother grabbed my arm and pulled me back to the surface. The woman was disheveled and frantic as she ran straight for our pile of belongings. She began grabbing our fishing poles and clothes, clutching them to her chest while shouting that everything now belonged to her. She gathered the items in a desperate heap, dropping small pieces of gear as she managed the armful. Our oldest brother shouted for her to stop and tried to move faster toward the shore to reclaim our property. However, our middle brother reached out and stopped him, pointing back toward the large man in the flannel shirt. The man had moved closer to the water's edge as we approached the shore. He raised his gun and leveled it in our direction as he walked. I remember yelling out in terror while my middle brother apologized. He told them we were sorry for trespassing on their land. The pair ignored our pleas entirely. Our oldest brother, driven by a mix of frustration and bravado, muttered that he didn't think the man would actually shoot. He tried to take another step toward the woman to get our shoes and shirts back. The moment he moved, the woman's demeanor shifted from frantic to aggressive. She pulled a fillet knife from her pocket. She began waving it wildly at him, screaming that she would cut him if he came any closer. By this point, the large man had reached the very edge of the creek. He cocked the shotgun with a heavy mechanical click and pointed it directly at my oldest brother's chest. That sound was enough to make him freeze instantly in his tracks. It was a terrifying, tense standoff. We stood chest deep in the cold water, shivering as we stared down the barrel of a gun. Once the woman had finished scavenging every bit of our gear and clothing, the man spoke a single, gravelly word. He told us to get out. We didn't wait for a second invitation. All three of us turned and swam desperately for the opposite bank. We scrambled out of the water and began running into the woods. The journey home was miserable. We had to hike several miles through the dense forest wearing nothing but our soaking wet shorts. We were completely barefoot, and every twig, sharp rock, and dried leaf stung our feet. Despite the pain, we were far too frightened to even think about looking back or slowing down. When we finally made it home and explained why we had returned empty-handed, our father surprisingly didn't scold us. He simply told us that there are dangerous, unstable people living deep in the woods, and that we had to be more careful. It was a very long time before any of us felt brave again.
Back when I was a teenager, me and my brother were absolutely obsessed with fishing. We still enjoy the occasional trip all these years later. Don't get me wrong, but back then we lived and breathed river fishing. So much so that we used to participate in fishing tournaments and therefore had to take part in training sessions every other day. Spoilers, but these training sessions were just an excuse to get some time in by the river, and I won't bore you with how the fishing tournaments work. So just take our word that we fished an awful lot. Anyway, I was like 13 years old. It was September, and me and my brother were fishing down at this river bend out in the sticks. Now, you gotta keep in mind that in river and lake fishing, you gotta be quiet as a mouse unless you scare the fish away. So as the skies darkened, this low rumbling of thunder echoed around the sky. Well, you can imagine how creepy that was. We're expecting rain, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop fishing. And it has to take much more than that to scare us off. And cue the appearance of some creepy stranger who walks out of the woods on the other side of the river. He doesn't have any gear with him besides the rod, but he's got a fishing hat on one that has all his scraggly gray hair tumbling out from under it. We try to wave hi, but he just gives us this look as if to say, "You're in my spot." And me and my brother are getting ready to pack up if he asks us, because God knows people can get really territorial about their favorite spot being crept on. But the guy doesn't say anything, and he just walks about 100 yards upstream and starts fishing up there. All right, he was kind of choking off our spot. But we were never ones to back away from a challenge, so we stayed put. As we're fishing, the thunder and lightning get louder and louder, and the gaps between them shorter and shorter, meaning it's slowly traveling right above our heads. I end up looking upstream to see if the grumpy old dude is still there, and he is. But then I notice how his rod is bending and doesn't sit right with me. It looks nice and strong, but way too flexible to be anything other than carbon fiber. At least, that was my guess. But here's the thing. Although you don't think of carbon fiber as being metal, it's super conductive to electricity. Meaning, if this guy really was using a carbon fiber rod, it wasn't so much a fishing rod as a lightning rod. I remember whispering to my brother, like, "Think that guy's using carbon fiber?" To which he replies, "He's old. Is that Tom?" "Look at the way the thing's bend, though," I remember saying. My brother looks again, and that's when he sees what I'm seeing. And then out of nowhere, This huge crack and flash let us know that we've just been within 100 yards of a lightning strike that impacted really close to our grumpy fishing guy. We get up and just hightail it over to where he was standing, and there's this guy's rod laying there in the dirt smoking. We started looking around for the guy to see if he was okay, but we couldn't find anything. Not a single trace of this dude. But then my brother finds one of the guy's boots lying near the root of the tree that's smoking too. And that's when he looks up. We finally find where the guy went. The lightning had blown this poor sob right up into a tree. We bailed to the nearest gas station to call the EMTs, but by that time, the guy was long dead. And there was no saving him. This was a long time ago, and a memory that stuck with me for a long time, and it was truly very hard to get back into fishing after that. But of all the freaky occurrences that kind of came out of that, the one thing that really stuck with me was the smell in the air when we finally found him. It honestly smelled like barbecue pork.
Illegal activities in the club. In a bustling American city, there was a lively place called Five Nights at Freddy's Club. It seemed like a fun and harmless spot for young people. The club had vibrant lights and music that attracted crowds looking to have a good time, dance, and make lasting memories. The atmosphere was filled with excitement as people embraced the carefree spirit of the night. However, hidden beneath the lively exterior, there was a secret side to Five Nights at Freddy's Club that the partygoers didn't know about. Behind the scenes, there were rumors of hidden activities that the revelers were unaware of. While the neon lights and energetic music created a lively atmosphere, there was a mysterious world behind it, keeping the patrons blissfully ignorant of the secrets hidden in the heart of Five Nights at Freddy's Club. One day, a reporter named Alex Thompson heard rumors about something bad happening at the club. People were saying that illegal drugs were being given to the partygoers without them knowing. Interested in uncovering the truth, Alex decided to go undercover to expose what was going on. Alex brought a hidden camera and a strong belief in doing what's right. Acting like any other person there to have a good time, Alex joined the lively crowd at the club. The place was full of energy, with bright lights and loud music making the dance floor come alive. As Alex moved through the crowded dance floor, it became clear that there was a challenge ahead. The club had tight security, with alert bouncers strategically placed to discourage unwanted attention. Despite this, Alex stayed determined, carefully watching the subtle interactions and whispered conversations among the partygoers. Weeks went by as Alex kept diving into the club scene, trying to collect proof to reveal the illegal drug trade. The nights started to blend, and frustration grew as every attempt to capture the illegal activities on camera failed. The drug deals were done secretly, and those involved were skilled at avoiding detection. But Alex didn't give up. Every obstacle only made Alex more determined to uncover the truth and shield the unsuspecting youth from the dangers hidden in Freddy's Club's shadow. One late night, as the music thumped to its peak, Alex had a breakthrough. In that club, there was a special room that only allowed rich and VIP guests. Security guards stood outside the room, making it impossible for an ordinary person to enter. For some reason, Alex found this strange and thought about listening to the activities and communication inside the room. However, the security was so tight that entering was completely impossible. Because of this, Alex came up with a plan. He decided to work as a waiter in the club to try to enter the room, but this plan failed because only appointed waiters were allowed inside. So, with the help of the club's gossip queen manager, Elizabeth, Alex thought of a way to get inside. After spending some time impressing Elizabeth, Alex finally got permission to be an appointed waiter. This way, he got the opportunity to enter the special room. The scene inside the room was quite surprising. Everyone there was discussing drugs and collaborating with the drug dealer. Alex recorded the whole incident with his mobile camera. Not only that, there was another incident in a corner. A group of people appeared to be involved in a suspicious transaction. Alex quietly approached, recording the exchange with the hidden camera. Finally, there was evidence. The footage showed young faces swapping small packages, exposing the unsettling truth beneath the surface of the lively celebration. Now that Alex had the evidence, it was time to reveal the story. Working hard to safeguard the identities of the innocent young people involved, Alex put together a powerful report. The report would expose the drug trade while ensuring the anonymity of those unintentionally caught up in the deceit. But this journey was not so easy. Bringing the truth of the Five Nights at Freddy's Club to light was no walk in the park. When Alex tried to leave the club with the evidence, he was caught by the manager, Elizabeth, who had overheard the hidden conversation of the drug dealer. As a result, security guards were called, and Alex was taken into a room and beaten. However, Alex didn't lose courage. Somehow struggling with a security guard, he managed to escape from the room and, overcoming great difficulties, exited the club safely, saving himself from potential harm. As soon as he got outside, he took a deep breath and wasted no time. Alex immediately went to the police station. Once there, he showed the police all the evidence of the illegal activities happening in the club that he had captured on his camera. He also informed them about the assault he faced. Listening to his story and seeing the evidence, the police were quite surprised. They registered a First Information Report, FIR, based on his account and the evidence provided. When the story came out, it had a significant impact on the community. The revelation of drug activities in the beloved club caused shock, worry, and demands for quick action. Five Nights at Freddy's Club, once a symbol of youthful joy, was now tainted by the shadow of illegal activities. Because of public outrage and the growing evidence, the police acted quickly. They closed down the club and started legal proceedings against those involved in selling drugs. The shutdown of the club sent a strong message to other places that might be doing similar illegal activities. The city, now understanding the risks in seemingly harmless locations, started taking measures to keep its young people safe. The incident led to a wider discussion about the importance of having better security in clubs and being more careful to prevent illegal activities from getting into places meant for fun and friendship. Alex's courage in going undercover not only revealed the truth, but also brought about positive changes in the community. As the city recovered from the shock of Freddy's Club's hidden secret, its people promised to stay watchful, making sure that hidden dangers wouldn't endanger their youth again. After everything settled, Alex thought about how investigative journalism could reveal things that some wanted to keep in the dark. The story of Freddy's Club showed that, even amid celebration, there could be hidden problems, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to find the truth.
About 8 years ago now, me and my dad and a few of my cousins were fishing down in southern Maryland one summer. We were out at the particular spot where there are these things called target ships. These are old decommissioned Navy ships that have been mounted on top of concrete pillars so they can float no matter how much the Navy tests munitions on them. They get shot at by all kinds of vehicles with all kinds of bullets, bombs, and missiles. But anyway, we're all on my dad's Grady White fishing for croaker and flounder right near these target ships. If they're actually being used for military exercises, you can't even get near them. So since there's no one out there to wave us away, we were out near the target ships with about 20 other boats in the water. But then, sure enough, about an hour and some guy from the Coast Guard sails up to us. They're on a big old CG boat with about 15 trainees on board, and the officer in command asks a favor from my dad. He wants to know if he can practice a little inspection drill with a few of his trainees. Being the good guy he is, my dad gives them permission, then renders them coming on board. I feel my rod getting all heavy all of a sudden. I call it out, and the Coast Guard officer stops his inspection and says, "Go ahead, son, reel it up. Let's see what you got." So I reel and reel, and it's really obvious how heavy whatever I've caught is. So naturally, we're all getting mad excited. Then, to all of our absolute horror, I pull the thing from the water, and we all see that it is an unexploded bomb. It was a cylindrical diamond shape with neon green stabilizers, about 12 to 14 inches long and 4 inches in diameter at its thickest part. Well, now the officer, the trainee, and the entire boat of Coast Guard has just witnessed what I pulled out of the water. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I watched the color drain from all their faces. They went from pink, unhealthy, to skeletal white. And the time it took to say the trainee on our boat literally leaves to his boat, and they all haul it away with their sirens on. This leaves a very rattled Coast Guard officer on our boat, who promptly orders me to not move a single muscle. The Coast Guard gets on our VHF and tells all the boats in the area to leave the target ships. And I'm telling you, you ain't never seen fishing boats move so fast. After about 20 minutes of me sitting there with this bomb on my line, the area is finally cleared away. The officer orders my father to put his boat and drive to achieve a good bit of speed, and then don't stop. So my dad goes as he's ordered, puts the boat in gear, and seconds, we're rolling about 50 to 20 knots away from the ship. The absurd brings out a knife, cuts my line, and orders my dad to just throttle the boat and get away as fast as you can. Needless to say, it did not detonate when it hit the bottom of the bay. We took the officer, who was pretty clearly shaken, back to his ship. I know it's hard to believe the story without proof, but in the situation, we didn't have time to get a picture of it. We tried, but the Coast Guard officer was adamant about us getting out of there as quickly as possible. But take my word for it, it's easily the scariest thing I've ever had happen to me during a fishing trip.
I have reactive attachment disorder, and as a result, I struggle with severe depression. However, I don't take any medication. I say that because I was going through one of the worst bouts of depression I had suffered in a year and a half. And I wasn't hallucinating because of the medication. It was Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, October 13th to 14th. I had cried myself to sleep like I had done for however many hours before. When I woke up, it was 3:34 a.m. My cat Betty was walking around on the bed, and for some reason, my alarm on my phone was going off. I used the Sleep Cycle app, and the alarm was going off even though I had set it for 5:30 to 6 a.m. So I am frustrated that it decided to stop working correctly. Then, I hear that my computer in the living room turns on. I thought that my other cat Vader must have knocked the mouse while wailing over the desk. Then I see the light turn off on the monitor. What? I thought. I was kind of pissed, so I started grumbling about the cats walking around, alarms going off unreasonably, and Vader knocking things about. Until I turned on the bedside lamp and saw both cats are lying at the end of my bed. Looking into my living room, I froze. I was so confused. I was trying to make sense of it when I heard my main door open. Like the screen door first, then the front doorknob. Then I heard someone move across the carpet. Unlike the movies, I jumped out of bed as quietly as possible, wondering how the hell was someone entering my apartment, as I sure as hell locked the front door to the apartment. I silently stepped into the hall and peeked around the corner. My cats nonchalantly decided to ignore the obvious home invader, thief, or murderer that had entered our home. I looked around the corner, and the door was closed. The lights were off, the monitor was off, but I could hear the computer running. I stood there frozen and listened for any noise for God knows how long. But I could not make sense of it at all and couldn't sleep the whole night. It wasn't a dream. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I don't know. But I have never been afraid of my apartment, and at that very moment, I felt very afraid. Very much alone. It hasn't happened again. Or maybe it has. I just don't know.
In the summer of 2006, I was offered a place to study history at Bangor University in North Wales. It wasn't my first choice of uni, but I always wanted to move away for university. I mean, that's half the point of the whole thing, isn't it? See, new places, meet new people, expand and enrich your intellect and all that. Bangor wasn't exactly Manchester or Birmingham, but there was something very quaint about having such a relatively prestigious university built into such a small and storied town. In the end, I only lived in Bangor for the better part of a year, as I ended up dropping out due to family problems. But my brief time there yielded a variety of different experiences. Some I'll always remember, and some I wish I could forget. So much like most other students at that age, university bred a desire for, well, experimentation. And as I partook in a few puffs of the wise man's mint, as one of my mates called it, and decided that yeah, it was something I was going to get into. I didn't take the drinking all that much, too much puking, and the hangovers just weren't worth it. But smoking up in a circle packed with intelligent, thoughtful people, that was a different kettle of fish entirely. Alright, most of the stuff we talked about was just absolute nonsense, which prompted nothing but a descent into giggles. But it was fun. And on top of that, you weren't a soulless, dehydrated husk the next morning. So one morning, I get talking to this local lad called Ricky. Ricky had grown up in Bangor, but wasn't academic enough for university. However, that didn't stop him from walking up into the student areas to take advantage of the public price pubs, which is how I got to talking to him. Eventually, the conversation got on to smoke and where I could get my hands on some, but local dealers didn't always trust the students, and even when they did, the chances that they just rip you off. Assuming you were spending mommy and daddy's money was very high indeed, which is why Ricky's promise of "I'll get some for you" was like music to my ears. I took his number down, told him I'd give him the text sometime, then finished up my pint, lost my game of pool, then wandered back to Hall's. The next day, I gave Ricky a text, and we arranged to meet outside a block of flats on the other side of town. This seemed a bit risky, as it was in the lower portion of Bangor, where the locals lived, and not up on the hill where most of the lecture rooms and halls were. But Ricky seemed like a nice enough bloke. I considered myself fairly streetwise, and with me having no other connections, I figured, why not? So I went to meet him, gave him my last 20 quid, and stood outside the flats and we went out to ring one of the buzzers. Now, I'm not completely soft, so I actually ended up peering over my shoulder to get a peek of which one he's ringing, just in case anything goes awry. The door opens. He says, "Back in a minute," and walks inside. A minute goes by, no sign of Ricky. 2 minutes go by, still no sign of Ricky. After 15 minutes of standing outside those flats like an absolute plant pot, I tried calling him, but as you can probably guess, he didn't answer his phone. I dropped him a few texts like "WTF is going on in here?" And again, I get no replies. Obviously, I'm absolutely furious, thinking, I can't believe I'm actually getting mugged off here, and there's absolutely no effing chance that I'm about to just walk away without kicking off. So I marched up to the little keypad near the front door of the flats and started buzzing the same button Ricky pushed. "Hello?" Some voice buzzes over the intercom. "Yeah, I'm a mate of Ricky's. He's got something that's mine. He needs to get back." Oh, the fellow on the other end was obviously playing dumb. "Look, mate, I've just seen him go into your flat, so you can either let me in, or I'll come back later with my cousins and we can see what happens." It was a pure bluff. My cousins were like 60 miles away, but it worked. There was a brief silence, and then the door buzzed open. I walked right up the stairs to flat 3, knock on the door, and someone instantly answers it aloud about my age, who's keeping the door closed over because Ricky is evidently hiding inside. Mate, I know Ricky is here, and he's got something in mind. So he was here, yeah. The lad cuts me off, but he's just gone off the back. Said he'll be back in a few minutes. Then I hear a voice that obviously belongs to someone older, saying, "Let him wait inside if he wants." The lad looks off to the right, then opens up the door. I walk in to see about 3 or 4 guys, again about my age, and one older balding bloke are down to his shoulders with this big, thick stash. In front of him on this dirty wooden coffee table, almost every kind of illegal substance you can imagine. And after waiting there for about 15 minutes, tension rising the whole time, I decided to give them something of an ultimatum. Because there's absolutely no doubt that I am getting scammed, and they just so happened to be in on it. Now, I know, what I did next was just stupid. But please don't underestimate how angry I was, and how I just refused to swallow my pride and walk away. So we turn to the old bloke and say something like, "Look man, let's just work this out. Ricky got 20 quid of mine, and I'm not stupid. I know what the crack is. I'm also not walking away without it. So let's just say you give me 1/8 of that green there, and that way, I don't have to file a police report saying some lad robbed me and ran into this flat. You get me?" Big mistake. Massive mistake. Sometimes, it really is just better to swallow your pride and walk away, especially if the only other option is throwing around threats that you're unlikely to back up. But in the heat of the moment, that's kind of what I did. And by kind of, Mo, you'll see what I mean in a minute. Until hearing my police threat, the older bloke just sort of nods his up to save fair shout and gets up and walks over to the front door. I'm thinking, hang on, what's he doing? And when he locks the front door to the flat with a mortised lock and slides the key into his pocket, I just think, oh, you can imagine what came next. The 3 younger lads jumped me. I tried my best to fight back, but as you can probably guess, 3-on-1 didn't give me a chance to throw, so much as 2 or 3 solid punches. Before I was on the deck getting the absolute life kicked out of me, all to a soundtrack of you coming to my flat and threatening me. Not happening. But the worst part was when I just heard, grab his hand, kept them still. I'm still in the middle of struggling, but I managed to get just a glimpse of the old bloke with a dumbbell in his hand might know what's coming. This fellow is going to smash my hand the bits without weight, and I'm probably never going to be able to write or type properly again. Thankfully, he didn't go through a smash in my hand up. Instead, he does this faint thing right as I think he's going to do it, then laughs his head off when I let out this embarrassingly girly scream. After that, I'm quite literally thrown out of the flat, and as I manage to bring myself to my feet and look back to see that one of the lads has my bloody provisional driver's license in hand, the wallet must have fallen out of the swipe during the kicking. Ah well, now we know your name and where you live. Go the filth and you're a dead man. Get lost. I wandered. But the story doesn't end there. It just gets much weirder and arguably more terrifying. If I'd have just walked away with a bit of a bruised ego, I'd have saved myself a good kicking. However, in actually laying hands on me, these lads had made a huge mistake. I wasn't some gangster bound to a code of silence and honesty. Neither were they. I was a big city, and I definitely wasn't scared of some small town dealers. And if they thought they could just intimidate some kid into silence, that were dead wrong. Because the first place I go, after I ended up getting kicked out of the Phyllis flat, is the Bangor police station. I was just dead honest with them. I told them I got scammed trying to buy smoke. Told the man being battered with me thinking the whole time. They're going to go round up this bloke's flat, and they're going to know he's got drugs in there. The place stunk of them, and that's how I'm going to get my own back. Solid plan, right? And quick side note, for anyone who says I'm a coward, a grass, or a snitch for going to the police, wind your neck in Tony, Montana. This isn't The Wire. This is real life, and you fight with anything you've got available to you. Only, it didn't quite turn out like that. I was hoping the police would knock round Nick the bloke and his underlings, and then I'd see massive drug busts in the papers for a week or something like that. But when the police got back in touch, they said they'd nick a lad for assaulting me, but he was going to plead guilty, so it didn't look like I'd have to go to court or anything. They gave me some leaflets on getting over trauma, advised me to file victims of crime compensation claim, and then that was that. Yeah, it was some small measure of revenge, but it wasn't quite the complete and utter takedown I'd been hoping for. That being said, it would turn out that I didn't have to lift a finger to get my own back on Ricky. His own people would do that for me. Not even 7 days later, I'm doing a bit of food shopping down at Morson's, when who should I see? The giant cast on his leg and bruises all over his face. But Ricky, of all people, almost everyone I spoke to about it was like, wow, that's some karma in action right there. And they might still be right. It might have been a complete coincidence that 1 week the lad robs me, and the next he's in a bloody thigh cast, which, how I know it, must have been a really bad break. Stranger things have happened, right? But there's a thing. I don't really believe in coincidences. I believe in cause and effect. I think the top dog down in the lower town flat was just that top dog in the area. And I think the trouble Ricky ended up causing him Mende was only a fanny hair away from being nicked for selling Class A's. I think he was so angry that he had his little minions break Ricky's leg. I mean, how else to explain his black eyes and all that? He slipped and fell on the path of an oncoming fun run, pulled the other one. But then, the thing that really tickled me, the thing that honestly made my blood run cold, was this. If they were willing to do that to one of their own, they wouldn't bat an eyelid at the idea of doing the same to some other idiot student, would they? And it's only then that I realized how bloody lucky I'd really been. A few months after I completely balls up my end-of-year exams, ended up dropping out, and that was the end of that chapter. Needless to say, despite the relatively short amount of time I'd spent there, Bangor really did teach me a thing or two. They just turned out not quite to be the kind of things I imagined when I arrived. It all happened when I was babysitting for this family in my town. Their daughters were 6 and 10. I was 16 back then. I ordered the pizza, and we all ate that, and then went on to play video games for the next hour or so, until Mabel, the young daughter, wanted to sleep. Mabel slept, and Violet, who was the older one, discussed the idea of watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I don't know if her parents would have allowed that. I even wondered why they even hired a babysitter, since Violet was pretty responsible herself. But the matter of fact, I agreed to watch The Nightmare at Elm Street. Did not want to look like an uptight dude. So we started watching it, and I brought in popcorn. She was pretty terrified, and we were sharing the blanket on our feet, quietly enjoying the movie. At around midway in the movie, we started hearing rustling noises on the outside. At first I thought maybe their parents were home, so I told her to switch to The Princess Bride so I don't get scolded for showing a horror flick. As I got, there was nothing. I got back inside and she was on the phone. It was her parents. They said they'd be late. The roads have been blocked and there is a rumor that the power will go shortly. They ordered me to go back and instructed the daughter to shut the doors and sleep. She told me that I just couldn't shake the feeling of leaving both of them alone, so I stayed with them, just to make sure. We stood there talking about things. She was smarter than her age, and she asked me all the questions about school and stuff, and we ended up doing her homework. And the power just went off cold, but we were ready. I told her to go to her sister, and she did. I stood down and locked all the doors and windows. It felt like a storm would build up. I went up and informed her about everything. 3 of us gathered around the TV, so it could be easier in case we had to make a run for things or cover. We got together to talk about things while Mabel slept. It was like one of those slumber parties that we had as a kid, and we chatted a lot, until the room started shaking. It felt like it was an earthquake. I quickly made Rabel and Violet go take a cover, and did it myself. I rolled on the flashlight to them, and told them to make way for the door outside. Before all the shaking, they made their way to the door, and we stepped outside. It was just the 3 of us, and a couple more people, since everybody was already out of town due to vacations. And as we stepped outside, we turned on the flashlights. Violet was holding me tightly, and I was carrying Mabel as she closed her eyes. Violet closed her eyes all the time too. And in a few minutes, a stream of lights made the night sky bright, and as it happened, I told Violet to open her eyes. It was beautiful. It seemed like a big, flat, square disc, making its way to the sky. It was flying way closer than most flying vehicles, as an airplane or gliders or helicopters did. I and Violet and Mabel kept looking at it, mesmerized. The sky was all red, and soon, as we were in awe, we were terrified. As it rained fire from the rear of that unidentified object, almost as if it was crashing, I held the girls with all my grip strength, and we ran towards the house and took cover. We huddled together beneath the table, wrapping ourselves with Mabel's blanket. After an hour later, we went outside. The smoke from that flying object withered the whole city invisible, and the redness of its light was still there. Our town looked exactly like that upside down from Stranger Things. This was the memory that Stranger Things brought for me. Mabel and Violet's parents were very grateful, and I did not leave as they arrived at around 8 in the morning. The UFO was a government spacecraft mission that failed and crashed at an abandoned site not far from our town. I shortly moved to New York that next summer. Moving forward to 10 years, I was 26 and out on a date. My date came in and introduced herself. We lived in a small town. It was Violet. She was 20 and was studying at NYU. We started dating, and the first thing we discussed was the night that it all happened. We have been married for 4 years now, and it all came back to us when we binge-watched the Stranger Things, almost as if it had a part of our life somewhere in it.